Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the channel and first film club in a while. It's been a busy 2026. I'm hoping to do these more regularly. So today we're going to be discussing a George Butler documentary on the Endurance. It was done back in 2000. And I think this is back on my radar because there is a new documentary done by Jimmy Chin and his wife. If you don't know Jimmy Chin, he did the Free Solo documentary, one of the, I think, best filmed and most interesting documentaries that I've seen in the last 10 years. And I thought, well, if Jimmy Chin's doing something on the Endurance, I should look. It's not very available in the US. And so I haven't been able to see it, but it turned me on to the fact that there was one done in 2000 by George Butler. And if you look at the opening credits, it's just sort of funny time capsule. Apparently it was paid for by Morgan Stanley in association with Monster.com. Those of you of a certain age will remember Monster.com was the Indeed for our generation. And it looked like executive producer Terrence Malick. If you don't know, Terrence Malick directed The Thin Red Line. And Caroline Alexander, who I've done a review, if I remember later, I'll put in the description. She did The Endurance, the book, which I've reviewed on the channel before as one of my all-time favorites. And the documentary cuts between the film and the video that were shot by Frank Hurley, which Alexander presents in her book, Liam Neeson's narration, discussing with the children of the survivors, and various other media reels. I think it's a generally well done documentary for something so removed from the time, and with none of the survivors still with us. They're still able to tell a compelling story. Haunting music. And we start with the ad that Shackleton, Sir Ernest Shackleton, who'd been on two Southern Pole Antarctic expeditions before, unsuccessful. He really wanted to do something. And the people who talked about him said, you know, he had a desire to do something exceptional with his life, and he had already been knighted, and he still wanted something more. And the job description he puts in the paper says, safe return doubtful, you know, not a lot of pay, it'll be very cold, etc. So, safe return doubtful. 5,000 men apply for this, which in some ways you could say there are plenty of people who don't have a lot to live for. That sounds exciting to them. Okay, I will grant you that population somewhat exists in our merchant marine class to this day and always has. Okay, fine. But there were still other men who did this. And of the 5,000 who applied, 27 end up going with Shackleton south. And they do so as Europe is heading into war. So Shackleton asks, if you need the ship, obviously we'll turn it over. And the one word reply, I think, from the War Department was proceed. So Shackleton and his men head south. And if you haven't had a chance to watch the documentary, I encourage you to do so. It chronicles all this. Same thing with the Caroline Alexander book. You can see it's not a very large, it's not a very long book. Lots of really wonderful photographs. That's the Endurance trapped in the ice. So they were heading down, trying to make landfall and then cross over to the other side. And what ended up happening was their ship got caught in the ice and they couldn't extricate themselves. And they said, okay, well, we're just going to have to winter here over until the ice breaks up. The problem was the ice wasn't in on the plan and decided to break up the ship. So plan A is gone, plan B is gone. So plan C is, we are now going to have to float. And it illustrates this in the documentary. They're trapped in pack ice, but the ice is not connected to Antarctica. So it's slowly rotating. And at some point it's going to break up. But now their ship is broken up. So they don't have a ship. They have lifeboats, which they can modify, and they have a carpenter with them, so they can add some accoutrement to help them get away. But now they're on to plan C. So plan C is, once the pack ice breaks up, we're going to make for Deception Island. Now, Deception Island was an island in this one of the few land masses around Antarctica where there were provisions stored for sailors in distress. So everybody knew that about Deception Island, and it was a little further than Elephant Island. And so when the pack ice finally did break up and all of the men survived, at this time they have to kill and eat the dogs who were going to bring them across Antarctica. They have to leave a lot behind. Hurley destroys, I don't know, 500 negatives. So all the photos we have, these are the photos that weren't destroyed, but they destroyed them because they didn't want to be tempted to go back for them. So I think they only keep 160 negatives. So that's all the documentation that we have from this, is because they hand carried them, made it all the way through. So, and at one point, one of the men, the carpenter, expresses a little bit, not quite mutinous attitude, but hey, you know, I'm not going to take this anymore. We're not on the ship, so the rules don't apply. And Shackleton is not going to allow there to be a crack of doubt, because realistically, the enemy at this point was not the ice or even the snow. It was morale, as is pointed out in the documentary. How do I keep these 27 men together and get them home safe to their families? And myself as well. So Shackleton cannot allow there to be doubt, cannot allow morale to droop. So he reads out the ship's articles and says, all of you men are still being paid because we haven't been brought into port. So as long as that's the case, I'm in charge, even though there is no ship. And basically the carpenter fell back into line. I'm forgetting his name now. And so that's one of the lessons of leadership there, is being able to take charge, but also hidden behind that, listening to feedback. A few days later, Shackleton realized the objections of the carpenter as to, you know, what the plan was something worth considering. And the bigger boat was built, and that would allow them to get a little further out later on. So the carpenter would come good when Deception Island turns out not to be the plan. So there's that flexibility of, I'm going to read you the ship's articles, but by the same token, I'm also going to be flexible enough to realize there's something in the seed of what you're saying that's worth considering. So from there, they set out onto the sea as the ice starts to break up, and they start heading towards Deception Island, to get provisions. But it's very hard going. And at some point, Shackleton realizes this plan isn't going to work. So he changes and starts moving towards Elephant Island. And this goes back to, again, that other aspect of leadership, flexibility, adapting to change. If I have a plan and it doesn't go the way that I want, I have to be able to flex with that, or I'm going to break, especially in a situation like this. So that's a great lesson of leadership. Do you have adaptability? Do you have flexibility? So we're on what, plan D, plan E at this point. They're not going to Deception Island. Now they're going to go to Elephant Island. And keep in mind, they're not even thinking beyond that yet. Can we get to land? Because we were escaping an ice floe where our ship had broken up. So now they're going to get to Elephant Island. They do get to Elephant Island. The men are overjoyed, is probably the wrong word. They're still freezing. No one knows where they are. But they're happy to be able to go to bed at night on land and not have to worry about sinking in under the ice. And as they consider their options, this whereas the carpenter re-enters the story of Shackleton having set him right and having not alienated him, he now commits to building that larger ship, which can sail from Elephant Island to South Georgia Island. Now, South Georgia Island is 800 miles away. So they take the Shackleton and 5 other, the most, you could say, competent sailors who can make this voyage, are going to go from Elephant Island to South Georgia. So we're on plan E or plan F at this point. The carpenter builds that ship. The men wave them off in one of the most iconic photos that you can see in there. Wondering if I can find it quickly, but I can at least show you the boat. So they're the men putting together that sailboat to get them out of there. And they head out. Now, the way it works is 3 men would sleep underneath the deck on shifts, and then the 3 men would be on top sailing the vessel and navigating. And they had to navigate with a sextant, and you're talking about 1 degree off on your measurement could mean a 60-mile differential, but they really only had a 10-mile radius in which they could miss Elephant Island and head off into the open ocean and to nowhere. So there's an illustration showing the man holding the sextant, trying to look up. There's no sort of horizon. There's no sort of sunlight to help him take his reading, and they're holding him up because of the wind. So if you could think of everything going against them in the natural order, it's incredible what they were able to do, but they managed to navigate, and they had 4 weeks of food. It's all they could manage. We're talking, leftover, cured seal meat. This is what they were surviving off of, blubber stoves. They get to Elephant Island. They get from Elephant Island to South Georgia Island. Now, the problem is, now we're on Plan G, right? They get to South Georgia Island. The whaling station is on the other side of the island. The interior of South Georgia Island has never been traversed. It is craggy rocks. It is snowbound. It is not anything anyone would ever want to walk, even if you had gear, even if let's say you had ice boots and walking sticks and everything else that could assist you. It's never been explored. So 3 men from the ship are too injured to go on. Shackleton leaves them on the beach with whatever they can, and he and 2 other men set out at 3 a.m. to cross this never been traversed, never been mapped territory to get to the whaling station. And you're still at this point, you think, of course they're going to make it. We have this book, we have this documentary, we know all about it, but it's still extraordinary. And you realize that willpower is part of it. And it's funny, I just did a live stream yesterday on True Restoration about motivation. And I've said that motivation can only get you so far, that you have to rely on systems. This is one of the other times where motivation gets you all the way. And obviously, I think this is the most primal motivation, which is survival, self-preservation. So they're almost there. They know they've already escaped the ice flow and the destruction of their ship. They made it to Elephant Island. They made it from Elephant Island to South Georgia Island. All they have to do is traverse this and let people, there's land, food, warmth, water, all on the other side. And that was something else to keep in mind. You might think, well, they had access to water. The problem was they couldn't suck the ice chips that could potentially cause frostbite. It would do bad things for their system. So they would take some ice chips, they'd put them in their sleeping bags at night and hope that in the morning, a teaspoonful worth of water would have melted for them to drink in the morning. It's extraordinary to read stuff like that. And the leadership that Shackleton shows in this last part is almost more important than everything else, because this is where you can fail. That's one of the things they talk about with Everest, is that a lot of the deaths on Everest don't happen on the way up. They happen on the way down because people didn't save enough for a round trip journey. They expended all their energy and care on getting to the top. And then when they're coming down, they don't have anything left. And they don't have any willpower left, and they die. So here, Shackleton, 2 of his men fall asleep. And as they're traversing, Shackleton lets them sleep for a little while, wakes them up after 5 minutes and says, it's been 30 minutes. Let's keep going. And the men believed it because they'd had some kind of sleep. But Shackleton knew if they fell asleep, they could probably die. And they couldn't let that happen. And also at one point, they're trying to come down a slope, and it just seems to be really difficult. And once again, Shackleton showing that flexibility, that willingness to think outside the box. He says, why don't we slide? And of course, knowing at the bottom of that mountain could be a bunch of rocks that you slide into and die. But Shackleton knows we just have to keep going. We have to make as much progress as possible. And they do. And they slide all the way down to the bottom. And they said it was a little fun. But you have to keep in mind, they're trying to live, but they're still having a little bit of fun along the way. They do finally make it to the whaling station. They bang on the harbor master's door, my name's Shackleton. And now, job's not done. He's got to go back and get his men on Elephant Island. Now, the problem was there is no way for the men to know whether Shackleton had been successful. They had given him 4 weeks worth of provisions, but beyond that, they couldn't calculate. And it had been 10 weeks at this point. And they thought, well, he's probably definitely dead. They didn't make it. In the meantime, Shackleton has tried to get back there, but weather has not allowed him to do so. So finally, I think it was a Chilean steamer or a Chilean boat from the Chilean Navy, definitely, is able to get to them. And it's a very moving moment. Even when you're watching the documentary and you see You hear that they made eye contact and Shackleton's looking and realizing all the men survived. It's a very moving moment, even now, all these years later, even though I'm not connected to them, to realize they knew that the person had come back for them and that ultimately God saved them. And they had done their part by taking care of what they could. And I suppose that's part of the lesson is you can do so much. God takes care of the rest. And yet this wasn't enough. They get back. Some of the men enlist in war. One of the men dies 6 weeks at sea, 6 weeks later after enlisting, after he gets back from the Endurance, if you can imagine that, dies in World War I, and comes back to a changed world. That's a different discussion. I think what I want to end the live stream with, if there's not any, is the restlessness that Shackleton had in his heart eventually culminates in his death. He goes back with some of the survivors to go back with no clear object of the journey, I think, other than to go back and reminisce about what had happened. And while down there, he dies. I don't know if it was liver failure or heart attack or something like that. And he's buried with the permission of his spouse, who never really saw Shackleton, there on South George Island. So there is this restlessness that will not be cured in the human heart. I think Shackleton exemplified this. And there's something interesting. The men testified who were crossing South George Island. They said, we really thought there was a fourth person with us on that trip. And it felt that way. They felt like a presence. And they were offering this unsolicited. I don't think they were trying to curry celebrity points with the supernatural. I think they just simply said, we felt a presence with us. And I believe it was probably a guardian angel, someone with them along this way, that we can look to the testament of the human spirit to say, yes, there's a lot there, because that's what's necessary. You have to do what's necessary on your side, and then Providence decides the rest. And Providence decided, in a sense, if you want to use that term, decided. It's hard for us as humans to get inside what Providence is, but Providence deemed that they would survive and to tell the story. But I do think, in my own humble opinion, the purpose of the Endurance, the purpose of the survival of all of the sailors of the Endurance, is to remind us of the hard battle of life, that there are many, many difficulties that you're going to run into. You're going to have to adapt. You're going to have to show leadership. But ultimately, it's not entirely in your hands. And if you believe that the Endurance survived and all the men survived solely because of their own efforts, I think you're somewhat missing the point there as well. But as I say, I leave it to you to watch the documentary, which is linked in the description. If you'd like to read the book, I have a review for that. I'll leave that, if I remember, to go back later and edit the description and put a link to the book, my book review, in there. I would encourage you to read the book. It's almost certainly at your local library if you just want to grab a copy and look at it. And those lessons of leadership, listening to feedback, willing to lay down the law, being flexible and adaptable when things change. And finally, the last one, which I hadn't mentioned but was in the crossing of South George Island, do more than your team. Shackleton made it such that the officers had the less warm coats and sleeping bags, and that the enlisted men had that. That's leadership of doing more than your team, i.e., you have to do more with less. Same thing. He allowed 2 men to sleep on that traverse of South George Island, but he didn't sleep. So leadership means, and the same thing that's modeled by our Lord in the agony in the garden, the apostles slept, he did not sleep. So leadership means doing more than your team is willing to do. And by that example, hopefully inspiring them to do more on their own in the future. So The Endurance by Caroline Alexander inspires Endurance by George Butler, this documentary. Encourage you to watch it. Thanks for joining me this morning. As I said, I don't see any questions. So remember, if you are watching this on replay, to hit like and share this. Consider subscribing if you're first time running into this channel. I do film clubs usually once a week when it isn't terribly busy, and I do them on all sorts of different subjects. So feel free to join us in the future and try to watch the film ahead of time so we can have a discussion during the stream. See you on the next one.